In 1928, a woman named Catherine Donahue, one of the infamous Radium Girls, had to have her jaw removed due to radiation poisoning, leaving her unable to eat or speak properly. A gruesome fate that would eventually lead to her death at just 31 years old. This was the devastating result of her job, where she was hired to paint watch faces with glowing radium, a practice that would go on to claim the lives of hundreds of women. But here's where it gets dark. These women were not only poisoned by the radium, but they were also deliberately misled by their employers about the dangers of the substance, leading to a prolonged and agonizing suffering. The story of the Radium Girls is a shocking tale of industrial tragedy, radiation poisoning, and the fight for women's rights and labor laws that would change the course of history. The Radium Girls were mostly young women, some as young as 15, who were employed by companies like the United States Radium Corporation and the Waterbury Clock Company to paint the faces of watches and other instruments with glow-in-the-dark paint containing radium. This was during World War I, when the demand for glow-in-the-dark watches was high, and the companies were looking for cheap and efficient labor. The women were told that the radium was harmless, and they were even encouraged to moisten their brushes with their tongues to get a finer point, thereby ingesting small amounts of radium daily. As a result, many of these women began to suffer from radiation poisoning, which caused their bones to disintegrate, their teeth to fall out, and their bodies to emit a glow in the dark. Nobody talks about this part, but the women's suffering was not just physical. They were also subjected to humiliating and painful medical examinations, and many were even forced to have their teeth and jaws removed. But here's where it gets even darker. The companies knew about the dangers of radium, but they chose to ignore them in order to maximize their profits. In 1924, a physicist named Dr. Harrison Martland discovered that radium was causing the women's bones to disintegrate, but his warnings were ignored by the companies. Instead, they continued to hire more women, many of whom were desperate for work and unaware of the dangers. The women were also forced to work long hours in poorly ventilated areas, which increased their exposure to radium. As the years went by, more and more women began to fall ill, and the death toll started to rise. By 1927, at least 50 women had died from radiation poisoning, and many more were suffering from related illnesses. And this is where everything fell apart. The women, realizing that they had been lied to and exploited, began to organize and fight back against their employers. The first act of resistance came in 1927, when a group of Radium Girls from Orange, New Jersey, sued the United States Radium Corporation for damages. The case, which became known as the Radium Girls lawsuit, was a groundbreaking moment in the history of labor laws and women's rights. The women, led by Catherine Donahue and her lawyer, Leonard Grossman, argued that the company had knowingly exposed them to a toxic substance and had failed to provide them with adequate protection. The company, on the other hand, claimed that the women had been aware of the risks and had chosen to take the job anyway. The trial was a sensationalized media event, with many newspapers and magazines covering the story. But here's the twist. The company tried to bribe the women and their lawyers to drop the case, offering them small settlements and threatening to ruin their reputations if they refused. The women, however, refused to back down, and the case eventually went to court. The trial was a dramatic and intense affair, with both sides presenting their arguments and evidence. The women testified about their experiences, describing the pain and suffering they had endured, and the company's lawyers tried to discredit them and downplay the risks of radium. But the turning point came when Dr. Martland took the stand and testified about the dangers of radium, revealing that the company had been aware of the risks all along. The jury was shocked and outraged, and they eventually ruled in favor of the women, awarding them significant damages and forcing the company to change its practices. And this is where the story takes a dramatic turn. The Radium Girls lawsuit sparked a wave of protests and demonstrations across the country, with many women demanding better working conditions and greater protections from industrial hazards. The aftermath of the trial was just as dramatic. with the women's victory inspiring a new wave of labor activism and women's rights movements. The Radium Girls lawsuit led to significant changes in labor laws, including the establishment of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration and the passage of the Fair Labor Standards Act. The women's bravery and determination had also inspired a new generation of female activists, who would go on to fight for greater equality and justice in the workplace. But here's the haunting truth. Many of the Radium Girls did not live to see the impact of their struggle, and their deaths were a grim reminder of the human cost of industrial tragedy. In the end, it's estimated that over 100 women died from radiation poisoning, and many more suffered from related illnesses. The legacy of the Radium Girls lives on, however, and their story continues to inspire and horrify people to this day. The case has been the subject of numerous books, films, and documentaries, and it remains one of the most significant and influential labor rights cases in American history. And this is the final twist. The Radium Girls story is not just a relic of the past, but a warning about the dangers of unchecked corporate power and the importance of protecting workers' rights. The story of the Radium Girls is a powerful reminder of the human cost of industrial tragedy and the importance of fighting for justice and equality in the workplace. Subscribe for more stories like this, and join us next time as we explore more dark and disturbing tales from history.